Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, if you've ever, had your morning coffee and thought about its more powerful relatives, well, get ready. Today we're diving into something that's a real biological puzzle. It's a plant, a close cousin of coffee, actually, that promises both like intense energy and deep sedation.
That's right. We're talking about Mitragyna speciosa,
Mhm.
or Kratom, as most people know it. And yeah, it's right at the center of this huge global discussion about the opioid crisis. So our mission today really is to unpack this using the sources. We'll look at how it's been used traditionally for centuries in Southeast Asia. We'll get into the chemistry, how you manage those dual effects. And then the really current stuff, the research into fighting addiction and pain. But also we have to talk about the risks and the kind of regulatory mess surrounding it.
Wow, okay, so it's like contradictory, useful, and controversial all rolled into one. Let's get into it then. How can one single plant be an upper, a downer, and maybe even a lifesaver?
Well, first, you get a picture where it comes from. Kratom's a tropical evergreen tree, native to Southeast Asia. It likes low elevations, swampy, humid forests. That's its home. And these trees, they get pretty big, up to 15 meters, so around 50 feet tall.
And here's the bit that always gets me the family connection. It's in the Rubiaceae family.
Mm-hmm.
That's the coffee family, so it's related to that little shrub that gives us our caffeine fix, but Kratom's this big tree.
Exactly. The Rubiaceae, or madder family, it's huge, like 14,000 species. And they're chemical factories, basically. They produce tons of compounds, many affecting our brains. We know caffeine, obviously, from coffee. But kratom, this tall, leafy cousin, well, it offers a much more complex chemical ride.
And looking back, the sources say it wasn't originally used just for kicks, right?
No, not at all. For hundreds of years, back in its home regions, it was seen as a practical helper, a tool. Traditionally, you had laborers, farm workers, chewing the fresh leaves. Why? Well, to fight off fatigue, get energy for long, hard work days, but also at the same time to ease the aches and pains from that same hard labor. So like a natural energy drink and pain reliever combined.
Huh. So how do people take it these days? Is it still leaf chewing?
Well, that traditional way still exists, yeah, like chewing coca leaves. But more commonly now, people brew it into tea, or it gets dried, ground into a powder, put in capsules or tablets, sometimes turned into extracts. You can even smoke it, though that's less common. And the effects, they kick in pretty quick, usually minutes, and then last for a few hours.
Okay, that speed brings us right to that paradox you mentioned, the dose thing. Laborers used it as an upper, but you hear about it being super sedating, too. What decides which way it goes?
Right, this is where it gets really, really interesting from a biological standpoint. It all comes down to the dose. How much you take completely flips the effect. So, low doses, it acts like a stimulant, boosts your energy, alertness, heart rate goes up, kind of like coffee, that upper feeling. But then, if you take more, cross certain threshold, bang, it flips. Higher doses act as a sedative, calms you right down, reduces pain, eases anxiety. It's a total switch.
That's pretty wild for one plant. So what's the chemistry doing there? It's obviously not just caffeine.
No, definitely not. It's down to those chemical compounds we talked about, alkaloids. These are nitrogen-based compounds plants make, often, to stop insects or animals from eating them. The coffee family is full of them. Caffeine's a pretty mild one we like, but that same family gives us things like nicotine, morphine, even cocaine, all alkaloids, all with powerful effects.
So Kratom's just loaded with these things. Which specific ones give it that upper-downer action?
The research really points to two main players, mitragynine and 7-hydroxymitragynine, often called 7-HMG for short. These are the primary active alkaloids, and they're the ones that produce those effects people describe as opioid-like. And the dose thing? It seems pretty elegant, actually. At low levels, they might tickle other brain receptors as well as the opioid ones, giving that energy boost. But when you flood the system with a higher dose, they bind much more strongly and almost exclusively to the main opioid receptors. That overrides everything else, leading to the sedation and pain relief.
Huh. It's like having a key that fits two different locks, but how hard you push the key, the dose decides which lock engages more.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. And the fact that these compounds hit opioid receptors, well, that throws this ancient plant right into the middle of a very modern crisis, the global opioid epidemic.
Yeah, and when you see the numbers, something like 60 million people worldwide dealing with addiction and over 100,000 dying just in the U.S. each year from opioid overdoses alone, finding safer alternative is just critical.
It's incredibly urgent. And this is where the science gets hopeful, really, based on that chemistry. See, traditional opioids, morphine, heroin, fentanyl, they're deadly. mainly because they're what scientists call full agonists. They latch onto that mu-opioid receptor and slam the activation signal all the way, full throttle. But that has a terrifying side effect. Respiratory depression, they can literally make you stop breathing.
Right.
That's how people die from overdose.
The fatal flaw, the thing that turns dependence into death.
Exactly. Now, the early research on kratom alkaloids, especially mitragynine, suggests they might be partial agonists. Think of it like instead of flooring the accelerator, you're only pressing it halfway. You still get effects like pain relief, maybe some euphoria, but and this is the crucial bit, it looks like it doesn't trigger that deadly shutdown of the breathing system in the same way. That difference could literally save lives.
Okay, that distinction is huge, potentially life-saving. But what about addiction? If it hits opioid receptors, isn't it still addictive?
That's the million-dollar question, and research is still working hard on it. Initial signs suggest it might be less addictive than those full agonists like morphine or heroin. We don't fully know why yet, but the potential is there. Again, this isn't a totally new idea. Back in Southeast Asia, they've reportedly used kratom for centuries to help people ease off opium addiction, manage withdrawal.
So this traditional use is basically getting a modern scientific look now. We have things like methadone for opioid withdrawal treatment currently. How might kratom compare?
Well, methadone is the standard, yeah, but it's also an opioid itself. It has its own risks, its own dependence issues, some early findings, and it's still early days. Hint that mitragynine might actually be more effective than methadone at easing some of the worst withdrawal symptoms. So imagine, if kratom could offer pain relief and help with withdrawal, but without that high risk of fatal overdose, and maybe with lower addiction liability, the impact could be enormous.
Immense potential, for sure. But, okay, let's balance the scales. We have to talk about the downsides, the risks. What does the research show there?
Absolutely. It's a potent substance, it's not risk-free, and like we said, a lot isn't fully understood yet. Milder side effects, things people report commonly, include stuff like dry mouth, maybe some nausea, feeling agitated, heart racing, especially with those lower stimulant-like doses, dizziness too.
Right. And what about more serious stuff or long-term use?
Yeah, there are more concerning reports. Things like potential liver damage, breathing issues, though maybe not the full respiratory arrest like classic opioids, tremors, even seizures in some cases. Psychologically, high doses can apparently trigger psychotic symptoms, hallucinations, and long-term heavy use has been linked to weight loss, muscle spasms, maybe even aggression.
And dependence is definitely a risk, right? Especially if people are using it to get off other drugs.
For sure. You can develop psychological and physiological dependence on kratom. Now, overdose deaths from kratom alone seem to be rare, thankfully.
Okay, but when we do hear about deaths linked to kratom, is it clear kratom was the only cause, or is it more complicated?
It's usually very complicated. That's a key point scientists stress. The vast majority of reported deaths where kratom is present also involve other, often much more dangerous, substances, things like fentanyl, heroin, cocaine, benzodiazepines. So figuring out kratom's specific role, if any, in those tragic cases is really difficult. It's often polydrug use that's the lethal factor.
Right. Now, despite this long history in Asia, it's blown up relatively recently in the West, hasn't it? Like estimates of 5 million regular users just in the U.S. Authorities sometimes suggest it's mostly recreational, but what are users actually saying?
Yeah, that's a disconnect. There was a big study looking at user reports, and while sure, some use is recreational, a huge chunk is self-medication. That's what people say they're using it for. They report using it for chronic pain, for anxiety, depression, and very significantly, to manage opioid withdrawal symptoms or to try and reduce their use of other substances. So it's being used as this kind of unofficial tool to get away from dependency.
Which leads us to this weird marketing thing you see, especially online in the U.S. You see kratom sold as red vein, green vein, white vein. They claim different effects based on the color or where it's from. Is that real or just marketing fluff?
It looks mostly like marketing fluff based on the chemistry. Users definitely report feeling different effects that line up with the color labels: red for relaxing, white for energy, green somewhere in between. Expectation plays a role, you know. But when scientists actually test these strains, they generally find very little significant difference in the levels of the key alkaloids, mitragynine and 7-HMG, between the red, white, and green products.
So the chemical profile doesn't really match the marketing story. It's a consumer trend, not necessarily a plant reality.
Seems that way. And yeah, you don't really see that kind of color coding in Southeast Asia, where the use is more traditional and functional.
Okay, and wrapping this section up, the legal side. Given how complex this is, potential benefits, potential risks, how are governments handling it? It sounds messy.
Oh, it's a total patchwork. A mess is a good word. There's no international consensus. The UNODC hasn't scheduled it internationally, but says, hey, keep an eye on it. But then you have countries like Singapore and Malaysia where it's strictly illegal, mostly due to addiction concerns. Thailand, ironically, one of its native homes, banned it way back in
Oh.
1943, but has been trying to decriminalize it recently. Then places like the Netherlands, totally legal. And the U.S., it's this weird, partially legal status.
Partially legal, what does that even mean in practice? That sounds like peak regulatory chaos.
It basically is chaos. The federal government, the DEA, tried to ban it nationwide a couple of times, but there was huge pushback from the public and scientists, so those attempts failed. So now it's left up to individual states. Some states have banned it completely, others regulate it, maybe age restrictions or testing. But in most states, it's sold completely unregulated, often just labeled as a dietary supplement or botanical product. No oversight.
And that lack of regulation, that's the big catch-22, right? It creates the biggest danger, but also maybe an opportunity.
Exactly that. The danger is obvious. When it's sold totally unregulated, the potency, the alkaloid levels, can be all over the place. One batch might be weak, the next dangerously strong. Consumers have no idea what they're actually getting. That massively increases the risk of unexpected effects or accidentally taking way too much. That's the huge risk.
Okay, so what's the flip side, the silver lining?
The silver lining, weirdly, is because it's not federally scheduled as a controlled substance in the U.S., researchers can actually study it much more easily. They don't face the same massive regulatory hurdles and red tape that make studying, say, cannabis or psilocybin so difficult and slow. So this lack of restriction is actually speeding up the research we desperately need to figure out the real benefits, especially for pain and addiction, and just as importantly, to nail down the true risks.
That really sums up the dilemma perfectly. Okay, so bringing it all together, what's the main takeaway for someone listening right now?
I think the key thing is that kratom is this incredibly complex natural substance with a really long history. And right now, it's at this critical point. It holds genuinely immense potential, maybe even life-saving potential, for tackling the opioid crisis, primarily because it seems to offer some opioid-like benefits without that deadly risk of respiratory failure. That's huge. But its complexity, especially the dose-dependent effects and the dangers of a totally unregulated market, mean we absolutely need more rigorous research fast. And eventually, some kind of sensible science-based regulation is crucial before we can really know its place, medically speaking, and use it safely.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Considering that traditional use, centuries ago, basically anticipated one of modern medicine's biggest needs, finding something opioid-like but safer, it makes you wonder, what other traditional plant knowledge is out there? What other compounds, used functionally for generations around the world, might we be completely missing in our search for new medical answers? Definitely something to chew on.